Hello everybody and welcome back. My name is Cursive and welcome back to another video and welcome back to another tier list. We are here with the January 2021 tier list for the Battle City box format. We've gone through a few tournaments now. We're a good bit into the format itself. We've seen decks top, we've seen results, so we're here to give you the tier list. And if any of you have watched one of my previous two tier lists, I bet you can guess who's with me. Welcome, Terramaster.
2021 and still tiering the list.
Indeed, indeed. But yeah, so we have a good few decks here today. I actually don't even know how many we got here. We got 4, 8, we got 9 decks here. So we got 9 decks to talk about, and we are starting off with the King of the Past, as Terramaster put it before. We are beginning this tier list with the Moth decks. Well, to start off, Moth has fallen far enough that there is no longer separate decks. It is just all under one category as Moth. And just to tier it first, just start off there. It's honestly a bit of a toss-up here. It could be
we debated
Rogue.
on this for a while.
We did. It could be Rogue. It could also be tier 3. It's either top of Rogue or bottom of tier 3. And I think just the fact that it's an engine, and I feel like it hasn't been tested as much as a lot of the other decks, I think it's going to hit the bottom of tier 3 for now.
Yep.
This could change in the future. But anyway, going off into the actual deck itself, what it does and why it is still being a tiered deck. Like I just mentioned, it is an engine. That means it can be splashed into multiple other decks. It is very, very generic. All you need is your skill, your 3 parasites, and your insert number of moths here. We've been going with 2 for a very long time. Blaze started using 3 at the end of last format, so maybe 3 is the new number you need now. I don't know. Me and Terramaster use 1 in Pass Man, so it can fluctuate, but regardless, it is a very, very small engine. If you have a deck that doesn't require its skill, you can definitely splash this engine in here. And yeah, I mean, it offers super consistent OTKs. It is a +2 off of the skill. The only thing that truly weakens the deck drastically from where it once was is the introduction of Book of Moon. If you watched any of the multiple YouTube videos from the Speed Duel community talking about the best staples of the format, I'm pretty sure everyone has mentioned Book of Moon, probably in the number 1 slot. So with that card being as prevalent as it is, and with it stopping the parasite play so consistently, it's crazy. And it definitely drops the deck down drastically. Last format it was tier 2. This format it has gone down to tier 3, potentially Rogue. Do you have anything you want to add, Terramaster?
That is power creep in action.
Yes.
As you see, a former, what could almost be considered a tier 0 deck a year ago, has now slowly been moved all the way down to tier 3. And other than that, I think the only thing I want to say is the only way the deck overcomes the Book of Moon problem is that I've seen it running a ton of back row hate. So they will run Night Beams, they will run Breaker, they will run even Cosmic Cyclone, they will run Dust Tornado, which is still around. Yeah. They'll run whatever they can to try to hit that Book of Moon before they go ahead and try to equip their Parasite. So that's how the deck has to play now, is you have to play, I would say, 6, maybe even 9 cards that can hit the Book of Moon before your Parasite comes down. So end phase Parasite becomes a lot riskier because then you haven't had that chance to clear the potential back row first, unless you're depending on obviously a quick play or a trap to do that.
Yes, for sure. And that goes back to the fact that it is a generic engine, which means you can play all that back row without having to worry about your deck slots, basically.
Yep. So, I mean, on that generic engine point, like, it might be one of the decks that never completely goes away. Like, Cocoon of Ultra Evolution, the skill might always have a spot in the Rogue tier for a long-ass time, just because it's I don't know, like, it's like you said, it's such a generic skill. It's just an engine. So no matter what deck you're using, whatever your actual deck is, you just throw in an additional 5 cards and use Cocoon as your skill, and there you have it. Like, it's still playable.
Yeah, exactly. But enough on Moth here. And on the topic of engines, the next deck we have here is Apprentice Monarchs, which is the Inner Conflict deck using the Apprentice engine. Terramaster, take us away.
It's not the best way to play Inner Conflict, but it's a way that Inner Conflict is being played right now. And because it's Inner Conflict that has the ability to play slow as well as fast, it has to go into tier 1.
I completely agree.
Yeah, Inner Conflict, like you said, speaking of engines, this is Inner Conflict is, I wouldn't say it's an engine, but it's like, for anyone who's played the old TCG, we've said this 100 times at this point, but imagine having Change of Heart guaranteed in your opening hand, and it does not, like, replace a draw.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? So that's why still, even an entire 200 cards later, Inner Conflict is still the top deck of the format, and a deck that plays it, even though it plays it passively rather than aggressively, which is how the deck was played previously and still can be now. But even a deck that plays it passively can still be considered the best or the second best deck of the format right now. There's not really much else to say. It's just that this deck does give you a more variety in your play style, which is that you can, if you don't draw your Monarch per se, you can play the slow game where you set your Apprentice and you kind of thin your deck and stall out until you do have the big play ready to go. But I don't know, what do you want to say about this?
Well, yeah, going back to what you mentioned on Inner Conflict, it is, I mean, I considered it to be a staple in my my little staple discussion video here. Honestly, like, you genuinely can't go wrong with a card that just says take your opponent's monster and they can't respond to you taking it, and you don't need to draw the card. You always have the card. So that in its own right is absolutely absurd. We got a bunch more Monarchs added to the card pool, which gives the deck a bunch of versatility and a bunch of side deck options. But really, what really differentiates the Apprentice Monarchs from the just Inner Conflict Monarch deck is the fact that it's a different play style. It has the ability to play slow and fast. It also has the ability to have constant fodder for your Monarchs after your initial conflict play, because you do have all those floaters. And another thing to mention too is that basically every conflict deck is on Breaker, and a nice little interaction that Apprentice Magician adds with Breaker the Magical Warrior is that it can re-give it its counter to go ahead and pop another back row, which can be relevant in a lot of matchups.
Yeah, or just a power boost. I mean, that'll come up less often, but it can also make it 1900 just to let it get over something that you might not be able to without it. So
yeah, for sure.
All right.
But yeah, Apprentice Monarchs easily taking the tier 1, and then we have the only deck that is above Apprentice Monarchs, that being Terramaster's favorite way to play Inner Conflict. Inner Conflict Monarchs. This is the deck that has been performing the absolute best since the start of the format. I mean, it won my event, it won the Speed Duel League series, I think it also won Tetras. I'm sure it won a good few of your single limbs over on Legacy. This deck has been performing phenomenal, and it is going with the conflict strategy that we all know and love. Play big, beat sticks, and OTK. It's pretty simple. It's a much more beatdown-centric strategy than the Apprentice Monarchs, but you still have Inner Conflict, and you really can't go wrong with Inner Conflict. If you're playing Inner Conflict, chances are you're playing a tier 1 deck.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I want to say that this is the optimal way. I really want to say this is the right way to play Conflict, but I'll say this is the optimized way to play Conflict, because a skill that lets you take your opponent's monster and tribute it off and win on that turn, you should try to take advantage of that, in that it's giving you a possible win condition immediately, and you should try to use that as much as you possibly can. And another thing I want to mention is that, yeah, the decks do run Breaker a lot, but another thing I have noticed is that they also still are on Charging Gaia a lot.
Yes.
And that goes back to the staple that is Book of Moon.
Yes.
And that's because if that Book of Moon is used on your Gaia, your opponent is actually powering it up. So you're like, okay, that's completely fine. I will take my Gaia becoming 2300 for you to block one measly attack. So and of course Gaia starting at 1900 then potentially just getting powered up is obviously another reason why you play it in the aggro version of the Inner Conflict deck, which is, again, I think the best way to play a deck like this, because your win condition is to win as quickly as possible, to apply as much pressure as possible. It's also easier to play. Like, that's another advantage of it that we don't always talk about, is that it's slightly more brain dead, and then you just summon an attack, right? So that's it. I mean, an entire format later, Inner Conflict is still on top.
Yeah, we had a Inner Conflict, like Jinzo last format, winning the majority of the events and having the majority of the representation in every single event. Now we have the Inner Conflict Monarchs because, well, Jinzo's not the only good Monarch anymore.
It's still around. Jinzo's still played. Kaiser Glider is still played. I've seen Grand Marg. I've seen Dark Red Enchanter. You have a lot of choice now in your Monarchs, which I guess makes it technically a little more diverse, but it's the same thing.
Yeah,
let's not kid ourselves.
Just don't play Blowback Dragon.
Yeah, just don't play Blowback Dragon. Yeah, well, that's another discussion for later, though.
Exactly. But anyway, moving on to the next deck here, we have a classic, Viral Despair.
Yes, we do. It's an oldie but a goldie.
Oh yeah.
It is Viral Despair. Unfortunately, it's still a playable deck. I think we've tested it a little bit and we know that, but it's not good enough to be tiered, in our opinion. So we're going to go ahead and drop that in Rogue.
Yep.
And, I mean, the deck functions the same with the same concept. The fact that having a instantly summonable with, like, on your opponent's turn whenever you want, pretty much, 3,000 defense monster is still really, really good, and there's still no easy answer to that in the format. Like, yes, there are some new answers like Exiled Force, but not a lot of the top decks are on things like that. And like we already talked about, there's even less Moth now than there was before. And Moth was one of the few things that first you can just parasite off the Despair, and then second Moth runs over it. So that's one of the few easy ways that another player, like your opponent, if you're playing Viral, could get over your Despair. But now that's no longer the case, right? So you look at all these conflict decks. If you remember, the whole reason Viral Despair was a thing in the last format was because it had a good matchup with conflict. Well, none of that has changed. Like, all these new Monarchs, none of them can do anything against a 3,000 defense monster that just sits there. So you still have the advantage of having a good matchup against Inner Conflict, unless they're specifically running something or siding something to get rid of your Despair. And this is actually one thing where you might be a little more afraid of the Apprentice version because they have Old Vindictive Magician.
Yeah.
But I mean, other than that, it's mostly a good matchup with the Inner Conflict variants. And a lot of that is just because, especially if your opponent's not on Jinzo, now all of a sudden you can get really greedy with your Haunted Shrine, right? In that you can get maximum value out of it. And that could just be devastating to a conflict deck. It's like, yeah, maybe they have 4 outs to your Despair. Fine. You can summon it 6 times.
Yep.
So yeah. I don't know if there's much else to add to that, but I'll let you go for it.
Yeah, I mean, the only other thing I'm going to mention is that even though Old Vindictive Magician is an out to Despair, your opponent can force you... you can force your opponent to use Old Vindictive on other monsters. Like, maybe they out at your Despair prior to, well, maybe you're sitting on a Zombina now. You know that's an Old Vindictive, or you know that's a set, so it's probably the Apprentice package, and you start running into them, and they can pop your Zombina. Sure.
Yeah. I mean, and that's another disadvantage with this deck, is that it's kind of unlike aggro conflict, it's kind of a big brain deck.
Yeah.
So if you slip up, you'll probably lose, and like we saw that while testing. Like I literally lost a match because I played stupid. So yes. It's very easy to misplay playing this deck and lose because of that. But when you play it perfectly, it's a scary deck to have to go up against.
Yeah, for sure. But moving on here to our next deck in the list here, we have a deck that me and Terramaster have worked on last format, and we worked on it again this format. We have Spellproof Armor, the Moth Slayer, coming in to go above Moth. It has finally taken its rightful place above the insect. So,
Big Bird, better than Big Moth.
oh yeah, it even has a new mascot. Look at that, Big Bird. Big Bird. But yeah, the Spellproof Armor deck is obviously something that I have topped with this format so far, and there has been other players also playing this deck and topping with it. It's seeing consistent tops for a very low amount of players actually playing the deck, but overall it definitely doesn't feel higher than tier 3 in my opinion, especially after playing the deck in a competitive setting, and I will get into that a bit later. But why the deck is good overall is, well, one, it has access to a 2300 beat stick as a normal summon, which is huge. That competes with Gaia. And then two, it has all your monsters immune to spells. I mean, that is fantastic, especially with things like Book of Moon. Book of Moon mainly being the most prevalent thing in the format staple-wise. Offerings is still being played a bunch, and Soul Exchange is also being played a decent amount as well. All your monsters are completely impervious to them, and if you're able to drop a Jinzo, you now have a Trap Floodgate, and all your monsters are immune to spells, which can be absolutely devastating for your opponent. Plus, this is a beat-down strategy, so you have your big beat sticks in Colossus, which you should always run 6 of. You have your big beat stick in Jinzo, which you can get out easier now with Soul Exchange. And then you have, which I think is the correct card to play in Trap Monsters, that being Zoma, as just an 1800 beat stick and a huge potential burn to add to the deck. It basically beats every deck in a beatdown war, so if you are able to get past your opponent's conflict play, you will win from there on out, because you have the bigger beat sticks, you have the bigger monsters. As long as you survive the conflict play, you should win the match, and that's why this deck is so good. It's able to beat down all your opponent's decks huge. The only deck it truly struggles with in this format is the XYZ deck, which is why you put the majority of your side for that deck. Why it can't be a tier 2 deck? Well, one, its big glaring issue of XYZ, existing. And two, it doesn't have as many conflict OTK answers, going back to the fact that, this is the best deck of the format. If your opponent is able to bring out that big conflict Jinzo play mainly, well, you're only usually going to summon one monster at a time, and if you don't have one of your 3 Book of Moons, then you can't stop the conflict play. You can't play Sphere Kuriboh in Spellproof, which is a huge hindrance to the deck. I don't know if there's anything else you want to add, but that is my rant.
Yeah, no, you need, the issue with the deck, why it can't be higher, is you need to have the right back row to stop the conflict OTK from happening, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if your opponent has Jinzo, you need to have one of your 3 Book of Moon, and that's it, because you can't run Sphere Kuriboh, right? And if your opponent has, Kaiser Glider, then you still need to have a Floodgate or a Widespread Ruin, or whatever back row you're deciding to run. You have to have something there to stop that attack, or else you're just going to lose. And then obviously another problem is that, like you said, it's a slow deck. You're summoning one monster per turn usually, unless you get the Zoma out. And you're not going to OTK your opponent. You're going to beat them down over the course of a few turns, trying to get a couple direct attacks in with your big boys. But by the time that happens, your opponent can make their big play and kill you off.
Exactly.
So yeah, it's definitely got its weaknesses. But all that being said, it's a fun deck to play.
Yeah.
So that, in my mind, that gives it a +1.
Oh yeah, and if you're looking for something that doesn't take too much thinking, this is definitely your go-to deck.
Yep. Summon big monster, attack. Very caveman.
Yes.
Okay. All right. I think we're ready to move on. To Relinquished. That's right. Relinquished is still good enough to be mentioned, but that's all it is. It's good enough to be mentioned. So we're going to go ahead and throw that behind Viral in Rogue here.
Bah, there we go.
Yeah. And the only reason it's good enough to be mentioned is because of one card that we got. And that one card is Pre-Preparation of Rites. What this card does is that it frees up your skill slot when you play a Relinquish deck. So now, because you can consistently search both the Ritual Spell and Relinquish himself with just one card, you don't need to run the Thousand Eyes spell skill anymore, because you can go ahead and run the Ritual Spells fine. And this helps because you don't have to discard for cost anymore to summon Relinquish, because your pre-prep is essentially a +1 because it gives you 2 cards, so you don't have that -1 either coming off a Ritual Summon. And then your skill slot is freed up to use either Shadow Reborn, which is great because it brings back your Relinquished. Even if you have the loop and your opponent breaks it, as long as you survive, you can pay half your LP, bring back your Relinquished, take a monster, and then you've reset your loop all over again. And if they can't break it a second time, you pretty much win off of that. The other skill you can use is Inner Conflict, because Inner Conflict is good for everything, including this. So Inner Conflict, the way you use it is, instead of using your opponent's monster to tribute summon, you use your opponent's monster to ritual summon. And because Relinquished is a level 1, even if your opponent sets Sphere Karibo and you Inner Conflict it, you can still tribute their Sphere Karibo to summon your Relinquished. So that's really all there is to it. And oh yeah, if you use Inner Conflict to summon Relinquished, you can also take a second monster. So usually Inner Conflict can't get rid of 2 monsters. Well, here you can, and then you still have a direct attack with Relinquished afterwards. So that's something unique that the deck has if you play Conflict with it. But yeah. I think that's all I have to say about Relinquished.
Yeah, honestly, I think that's more or less it. I mean, the loop is still extremely, extremely powerful. The deck is one of probably the best ritual deck to play with Conflict, because you're guaranteed to be able to tribute off your opponent's monster, because all you need is level 1, and they're always going to be at least level 1. So, yeah, I mean, overall, like you said, the deck has some solid playability in this format. Definitely not a tiered deck, but still a rogue contender.
One more thing. Speaking of the loop, the loop is also easier to set up now if you want it to be, because you don't have to hard draw your Illusionist anymore. You can Foolish Burial to set it up in the graveyard. So just something I wanted to quickly point out.
Yeah, very true. Very true. But moving on, once again, from Relinquished, we are going into mine and Terra Master's favorite deck. God, I love this deck.
Don't we all?
We have the Twisted Personality decks, the TP decks of the format, the burn / stall / I'm gonna get counters and make the game last a really long time. Sadly, it's a tier 3. Sadly, it's still good. I wish it was gone, but nope, it still exists. Well,
rather have this gone than Moth.
Oh yeah.
Even like this, throughout the history of Yu-Gi-Oh, nobody liked playing against stall and burn.
Oh yeah,
so.
This is just not fun. The deck. But Felly likes it. Anyway, going off into why this is still a pretty solid deck for this format. Now, this is going off of someone who has not actually played the deck, but has only played against it. I mean, for starters, we have a Giant Rat package, which is what we're seeing most of the TP decks actually play now. We have our Giant Rat, which can flow into the other Earth monsters, like that of Amazoness Swordswoman, for burn damage to gain more counters. It can go into a Hyper Hammerhead for a bounce effect, an Exiled Force to remove problematic monsters, and probably the most relevant option that it can float into, that being Zombina. That's right, we have 6 copies of Zombina technically in the deck now, and if your rat dies and you float into a Zombina, you already have a target in grave to float Zombina into when it's destroyed on the field. That also means we can play this alongside something like Haunted Shrine, and playing all this alongside a burn strategy, well, you know, you can stall out the game, You can get those counters, you can bring their life points down, and whether you're playing in a multi-day event where you win by burn damage, or you're playing in a single-day event where you probably just win in time using golden ladybugs and your burn effects. Honestly, I hate the deck. I hate playing against the deck. I wish it was just gone, but no, it's still here.
Yeah. It's funny how out of all that, like other than Inner Conflict, obviously, the one skill I would never want to play against again is Twisted Personality.
Yeah.
So, whatever. We have to deal with it for now. I think we're done talking about it. Are you?
Oh yeah, I'm long done with that deck.
All right. Then let's go on to the two new fun decks of the format. The first of which is not as fun as the other, but we'll talk about it because we should.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
Unions. It's XYZ Dragon Cannon, and this deck is good enough. Not good enough to be with Conflict, but good enough to be right below it, right there in Tier 2. So the reason for that is this deck is very consistent. You know, you have up to 6 Union Hangers if you want it, although typically people play either 3 or 4. And that's kind of what sets you off. So Union Hanger will search for your Y, which will equip your Z. I'm sure everybody has seen that play at least a million times now. And then once you have access to those two, as long as you get some way to access your Exit Cannon, whether that be hard drawing it or foolish burialing it to your graveyard, you then have the option to fusion summon any of the Union fusions that you want to summon using your skill. And once you've done that, you can discard and start popping whatever you want to pop. And then what makes the deck actually incredibly good is the amazing follow-up play, which is Union Scramble, which just spams the field from your banish pile as much as you want. So we really just went from like never ever using the banish pile to now we're just like straight up spam special summoning from it.
Now we're
So-
abusing it.
yeah, so that's speed duels for you. And while it's not quite as consistent as Conflict because it's not generic, like you could still get like hands that make you go bleh. And then at the same time, there's also the situations where I completely lost my train of thought. So is there anything you want to say about this deck?
I mean, like you said, the deck can be extremely explosive. It gets access into XYZ Dragon Cannon super consistently. Along with that, it gets easy access into the smaller 2-letter fusions. And along with that, you are doing this off of a skill summon, meaning 90% of the time, you are guaranteed your very first pop, your very first destruction off of your XYZ Dragon Cannon. I say 90% of the time because there are some interactions where you can stop that, and I might have missed one in my top 8 match in the Speed Duel League series, but that's besides the point. We'll have a video for that later. Very, very powerful deck.
I was going to say, that does remind me what I was going to say, which is one of the issues with the deck is how easily it gets sided against and how pretty much everyone who has even a not good matchup against it is siding against it.
Yeah.
So you're playing this deck, like I'll say 1, expect to win game 1 a lot.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Like 90% of the time.
And then 2, yeah. And then 2, expect to get hit with Lost Wind in game 2 and 3. So, yeah.
Yeah, no.
That's it.
If you're playing versus like any deck that is tiered below XYZ, you're almost always going to win game 1. The decks in the same tier or above, then it's almost like a bit of a toss-up. But like Terramaster said, the big issue with it is that going into game 2 and 3, they are going to be extremely, extremely prepared for you because everyone is siding for this deck, even if they have a good matchup versus this deck, they're still siding against it because it is such an easy side deck option, and they know they're going to run into the deck because of how prevalent it is. I think it's the 3rd most played deck so far this format, underneath the 2 Conflict decks. So it's a fan favorite. It's a very powerful deck. You know you're going to see it, and Lost Wind is just such an easy pick to go up against it. So yeah.
Yeah, it's a brain dead side. We always talk about brain dead play styles and brain dead decks to build, this is a brain deck side deck choice, which is just like, yeah, just you don't know what to size, throw in a couple Lost Twin, man.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
Yeah. But yeah, moving off into the very last deck here of this format, of this tier list, we have the Magnet Warrior deck. A deck that I originally thought was a tier 3 deck. But after basically watching Artlequin play in my FFA event, me and Terramaster realized how you're supposed to play the deck, and we then came to the conclusion that it is a tier 2 deck for sure. I think it's under XYZ just because it's also very easy to counter due to its primary win condition being a control strategy, bouncing your opponent's monsters off of the field spell and spamming the board off of the field spell. So any back row removal or ways to destroy the field spell is a huge hindrance to this deck. Similarly to XYZ, has a very easy counter, and overall just doesn't have the same amount of tops as the XYZ deck does. Although it does have a first place from Artlequin, it has a top 4 from Artlequin, and it has a top 4 from myself. I think it also has a second place from Juan in your test tournament. So
Yes.
it's seeing good results, just not as many as the decks above it. But regardless, a very powerful deck. It's the only deck that is going to get a turn 1 2 monsters on the board unless I am not thinking about something.
Yeah, no, probably.
Yeah.
I mean, we know we had this discussion. The probability is high if you're getting 2 monsters on the board turn 1, but that doesn't mean it always happens for me or you. But guys, trust me, if you play this deck, you should very likely have a magnet, a field spell, which means you should end up with 2 magnets. So hopefully that works out for you better than it has for us. But when the deck works, it's damn near unstoppable.
Yes, similarly to the XYZ deck, going into a game 1 scenario or going into a non-brick scenario, as I like to call it, you actually win 90% of the time, especially against all the decks that are below it. The only one that would be an exception is Spellproof Armor, because it does counter your field spell, which is why in the opposite of Spellproof Armor having to deal with XYZ and filling up its entire side deck for that, Magnets use the majority of their side deck to go against Spellproof Armor, as that's their worst matchup.
And you'll never guess what we came up with as a side deck solution to going against Spellproof Armor.
If you want to find out, check the cards and go watch my top 4 deck profile on the Magnet deck.
That's right. No spoilers here. But yeah, in my opinion, and I think you agree, though, Magnets is the most fun deck on the screen right now to play in this format. So, and me and you are on it a lot. So I'm going to say if you want to have fun playing this format and still have a chance to be competitively successful, my personal recommendation is to play Magnet Warriors.
Yes, I completely agree. I played Spellproof in the Speed Duel League series. Personally, I found it kind of boring just to stick to like just a straight, almost brain dead beatdown strategy. But Magnet is a very fun deck. It is a control heavy deck, and there is a lot of scenarios where you have to recognize if you have OTK or not. There's a lot of thinking that you have to do. There's a lot of thinking involved with the deck, and it makes it a lot more fun than a lot of the brain dead sort of, well, this is the common opening play, this is the common turn 2 play, like your Conflict and your Spellproof. So yeah.
Yep. And oh yeah, did we mention the most important card in the deck is the field spell?
Oh yeah.
So
you play 6.
You absolutely want to play 6 field spells. Like you play almost as many field spells as you do Magnet Warriors.
Yes.
That's how good the field spell is.
Yes.
So you always want a field spell, you always want a Magnet Warrior, and as long as you can keep both of those cards, one of each, on your field at all times, you're winning. Trust me.
Exactly. You got to recognize your win condition, right? Your win condition for Magnets is your field spell, so you run 6. Your win condition for Spellproof Armor is beat down, so you run 6 Colossus. those are the only decks that I've really played this format. But play Monarchs for these ones. That's your win condition.
Right, exactly. Play big boys in Monarchs or Apprentice in Monarchs. So somewhat complicated, but some are a little bit more, have a little bit more nuance to them, which is what makes them fun to, at least to us. So
yeah. But overall, I think that is a fairly sound tier list for this format. Me and Terramaster didn't rush into it this time like we did with the last one on my channel, where we kind of started throwing things in the tiers and then realized that, hey, this is really wrong. But this time, I feel very, very confident in this tier list. If anything changes, there will be a tier list later on in the format over on Terramaster's channel, chances are. So I highly recommend checking the description and heading over to Yu-Gi-Oh! Legacy and subscribing. He recently hit 100 subs. And I do apologize, but when this video is being uploaded, his 100 sub special tournament is past. So if you missed it, sorry, but go, head over to the Discord and catch any future tournaments they do.
appreciate it, man.
No problem, man. But anyway, on that note, we're going to head on out. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please hit the like button down below and also consider subscribing. Trust me, subs and likes go a very, very long way. And also, if you've made it this far, go ahead and comment what deck you guys are playing for this format. I'm very interested to see what decks you're enjoying, what decks you're playing. But anyway, I'll catch you guys not tomorrow, but the following day for another video. That's a wrap, guys.